The emergency call came in at 11:43 yesterday morning. 178-kilometer-per-hour winds had just torn through central Portugal, ripping apart everything in their path. What meteorologists are calling Storm Kristin wasn't supposed to happen this way, but the Atlantic had other plans. In the coastal town of Figueira da Foz, a massive Ferris wheel was torn from its foundation and hurled across the town center like a child's toy. At Monte Real Air Base, million-dollar F-16 fighter jets suffered damage when falling hangar roof panels crashed down on aircraft parked inside what should have been secure shelters. Emergency services logged over 5,400 incidents in a single day, more than they typically handle in 3 months. And now, MyMes rescue teams count the dead and millions sit in darkness. One terrifying question remains unanswered. Was this just the beginning? Portugal's most sophisticated weather monitoring systems detected an impossible escalation that defied every model. The Instituto Português do Mar e da Atmosfera had been tracking what appeared to be a routine Atlantic depression since January 26th. Standard low-pressure systems approach Portugal several times each winter. Predictable, manageable, rarely dangerous. But at 8:37 yesterday morning, something changed. Wind speed readings began climbing exponentially. By 9:15, meteorologists were staring at numbers that challenged their understanding. 178 kilometers per hour at Monte Real Air Base. The Instituto Português do Mar e da Atmosfera reported maximum sustained winds of 149 kilometers per hour, while not exceeding Storm Leslie's devastating record of 190 kilometers per hour.
And many areas of Portugal, killing at least 6 people, leaving hundreds of thousands without electricity, and causing severe destruction across
emergency services across central and northern Portugal. Well, the National Emergency and Civil Protection Authority logged over 50
damage to homes, roads, and critical infrastructure. On January 28, 2026, Portuguese authorities confirmed that at least 2 additional deaths are under investigation and may be linked to severe weather conditions during the storm. According to officially released data, 5 deaths have been directly confirmed as Rainha Grande. The 5th death occurred in Vila Franca de Xira.
But sting jets are notoriously difficult to predict. They form and dissipate within hours, sometimes minutes.
Scale. Images from the scene show
then spread inland like a surgical strike against Portugal's most vulnerable infrastructure. Power stations that had operated safely for decades were suddenly exposed to forces they were never designed to withstand.
Water levels rose rapidly due to prolonged heavy rainfall. The woman's vehicle
and 1 million people lost power. Nearly 10% of Portugal's entire population plunged into darkness simultaneously. Emergency responders found themselves racing against time to reach victims, navigating roads blocked by debris, fallen trees, and communication systems failed.
In Pombal, within the Laria district, local officials warned that prolonged 485,000 customers had not yet had power restored, with Laria being the
in ways that have scientists questioning their fundamental understanding. European weather agencies, including the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts, had been monitoring the Atlantic system for 72 hours before it reached Portugal. Our initial models predicted a standard extratropical depression, winds of 60 to 80 kilometers per hour, moderate rainfall, typical winter storm conditions. The system showed no signs of the explosive intensification that was
CEMS is Europe's key source of information for disaster risk management. Is ready to print maps within hours to and building resilience to future disaster. Validation module checks the quality of CEMS in near real-time monitoring, relevant information and early warnings for global geospatial and quantitative. Supports the providers with valuable information about our Earth. Together with in-situ observations and models, 6S products, and fosters the continuous improvement of these challenges and our planet.
So rare that few meteorologists have ever observed it in real time.
76 kilometers per hour on Wednesday morning at Monte Real Air Base in Liria.
Land masses disrupt wind patterns and atmospheric pressure differentials stabilize. But Kristin behaved like a storm possessed. The stingjet phenomenon occurred when cold air in the upper atmosphere descended rapidly through the storm's core, accelerating as it dropped toward the surface. Think of water flowing through a narrow funnel. As the opening constricts, the flow accelerates. In Storm Kristin's case, atmospheric pressure differentials created multiple funnels simultaneously, concentrating wind energy into devastating ribbons of destruction that carved precise paths across the Portuguese landscape. The storm's trajectory followed Portugal's natural geographical corridors, the Tagus River Valley, and the coastal plains between Leiria and Porto. These natural formations acted as wind tunnels, amplifying the storm's force and directing it toward population centers. What started as a routine Atlantic low-pressure system became a precision instrument of destruction, guided by topography toward Portugal's most vulnerable communities. Significant temperature differentials between Atlantic Ocean waters and continental air masses created conditions favorable for this explosive intensification. Climate patterns observed over the past decade indicate these differentials are becoming more common, not less. Atlantic storm tracks have shifted northward. Ocean temperatures remain elevated later into winter months. Atmospheric ingredients that created Storm Kristin's destructive potential are increasingly present throughout winter storm seasons. The most troubling aspect is the storm's surgical precision. Unlike hurricanes that cause widespread damage across predictable paths, stingjets create narrow corridors of extreme destruction surrounded by areas of minimal impact. Communities separated by mere kilometers experienced vastly different levels of devastation. Yet, what comes next could be even worse. Portugal has faced similar devastation before, and the parallels are haunting. But yesterday's storm revealed something more ominous than past disasters. In 1967, catastrophic floods struck the Lisbon district during the night of November 25th. River systems overwhelmed by prolonged rainfall burst their banks, sending walls of water through sleeping communities. Over 460 people died in a single night. Entire families swept away in their beds. The 1941 cyclone that struck continental Portugal claimed more than 100 lives across multiple districts, its sustained winds destroying infrastructure that had stood for centuries. But those were different kinds of disasters. The 67 floods built slowly over days of rainfall. The 41 cyclone announced itself hours in advance, giving communities time to seek shelter. Storm Kristin offered no such mercy. And survivors of the 67 floods described the sound that haunted their dreams for decades afterward. The groaning of infrastructure under impossible pressure, the sharp crack of trees snapping like gunshots, the terrible silence afterward broken only by distant cries for help. Yesterday, residents across central Portugal heard those same sounds again. What makes yesterday's storm particularly terrifying is its surgical precision. The 1967 disaster resulted from systemic failure. River systems overwhelmed, drainage inadequate, emergency services unprepared for the scale. Storm Kristin struck with calculated accuracy, targeting exact regions where Portugal's infrastructure revealed critical vulnerabilities. The storm identified and exploited weaknesses that decades of development had created. These central districts where rapid expansion occurred without adequate storm-proofing. Rural areas where emergency services are stretched thin across vast territories. Coastal regions where tourism development placed thousands of structures directly in potential storm paths. Historical records from the 1941 cyclone describe winds that sounded like freight trains and turned day into night with flying debris. Yesterday's survivors used nearly identical language, but there's a crucial difference. The 41 cyclone was a massive, slow-moving system that affected the entire country gradually. Storm Kristin's stingjets created pockets of devastation that struck with hurricane force while neighboring areas experienced only moderate winds. This precision targeting meant emergency services couldn't rely on gradual escalation to position resources effectively. Traditional disaster response assumes storms build predictably, allowing authorities to stage equipment and personnel based on projected storm paths. Stingjets render those strategies useless. By the time extreme winds are detected, they've already struck. The death toll from Kristin, at least 5 confirmed fatalities in Leiria, Marinha Grande, and Vilafranca de Xira, may seem modest compared to historical disasters. But the speed and surgical nature of this destruction suggests something far more ominous than past storms. Yesterday's disaster didn't just cause damage. It revealed systematic vulnerabilities that climate scientists have been documenting and warning about for over a decade. And now, the scientists fear history may be repeating itself. but accelerated and amplified beyond recognition. The immediate crisis extends far beyond yesterday's destruction, and new threats are emerging with each hour. As of this morning, 450,000 people across central and northern Portugal remain without electrical power. The restoration process, managed by grid operators, including EREDs, faces unprecedented challenges. Initial outages affected over 1 million customers, nearly 10% of the country's population, before overnight emergency work reduced the number. But the remaining outages represent the most difficult repairs. Transmission lines severed by falling trees, substations flooded by sudden rainfall, and distribution networks damaged beyond quick fixes. 11 districts remain under yellow precipitation warnings through noon today. These aren't routine weather alerts. They represent continued instability in atmospheric systems that meteorologists don't fully understand. Red warnings for sea turbulence persist along the northern coast. Porto, Viana do Castelo, and Braga face wave conditions that could overwhelm coastal defenses already weakened by yesterday's winds. Weather monitoring stations are detecting atmospheric pressure fluctuations that could spawn additional sting jet formations. The conditions that created yesterday's destruction remain active across the Atlantic, approaches to Portugal's coast. Prime Minister Luis Montenegro's visit to emergency headquarters yesterday evening revealed the true scale of devastation facing the country. And recovery teams discovering structural damage that extends far beyond surface repairs are finding that entire sections of Portugal's power grid require complete rebuilding. Transportation networks remain severed across multiple districts, with major highways blocked by debris fields that stretch for kilometers. The government is actively considering a formal calamity declaration, a legal mechanism that would unlock European Union disaster funds and authorize international assistance requests. This isn't a routine administrative decision. Calamity declarations are reserved for disasters that exceed a country's internal response capabilities. Portugal hasn't issued such a declaration since the devastating wildfires of 2017. Mirror officials in Leiria district estimate a full year for complete recovery, 12 months during which the region remains vulnerable to additional storms. The timeline assumes optimal conditions, immediate access to international aid, favorable weather for reconstruction, no additional disasters. Any complications could extend recovery well into 2027. More concerning are the conversations happening behind closed doors in Portugal's meteorological community. Sources within the Instituto Português do Mar e da Atmosfera describe emergency reviews of forecasting protocols and heated debates about public warning systems. The sting jet phenomenon that devastated central Portugal yesterday represents a gap in current prediction capabilities that could prove fatal during future storms. Atlantic storm patterns documented over the past decade show increasing volatility and unpredictability. The conditions that created Storm Kristin's destructive potential, specific atmospheric pressure variations and oceanic thermal layers, are becoming more common throughout winter months. Climate models suggest these precise, devastating strikes could occur multiple times per season, rather than once per decade. The infrastructure that failed yesterday, power grids designed for maximum wind speeds of 150 kilometers per hour,
and thousands of emergency incidents were reported nationwide as Storm Kristin made landfall. The storm brought extremely strong wind gusts, prolonged heavy rainfall, and caused serious damage to homes, roads, and critical infrastructure. According to officially released data, 5 deaths have been directly confirmed as a result of Storm Kristin. Among these, 4 fatalities were recorded in the Leiria district, including 2 in Carvide, 1 in Fonte Oleiro, and 1 in Marinha Grande. The 5th death occurred in Vila Franca.
Portugal's storm defenses were designed for a climate reality that no longer exists, and the implications extend far beyond national borders. European meteorological agencies are conducting emergency reviews of their fundamental prediction models in response to Storm Kristin's behavior.
Portugal, January 28, 2026. Storm Kristin devastated Leiria and many areas of Portugal, killing at least 6 people, leaving hundreds of thousands without electricity, and causing severe destruction across multiple regions.
Studies from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change suggest that under high-emission scenarios, the proportion of explosive cyclones with sting jets could increase by 60% by 2100 across Atlantic Europe. Even this more conservative projection represents a fundamental shift in the storm patterns that have shaped European coastal development for centuries. The most unsettling aspect of yesterday's disaster isn't what happened. It's what remains completely unknown. Sting jets form and dissipate faster than current monitoring technology can track effectively. Their intensity depends on atmospheric conditions that shift hourly, sometimes faster. Traditional warning systems provide communities with days or weeks to prepare for hurricanes, tropical storms, or winter weather events. Sting jets offer minutes of warning at best. Portugal's Atlantic coastline stretches for over 800 kilometers of exposure to oceanic weather systems. Every kilometer now represents potential vulnerability to the same surgical strikes that devastated Leiria, Marinha Grande, and surrounding districts yesterday. Emergency services across the country are redesigning response protocols based on assumptions that may already be obsolete. The psychological impact on communities cannot be understated. Residents of central Portugal lived through yesterday's storm with no meaningful warning, no time to prepare, and no understanding of when the danger would pass. That experience fundamentally changes how people relate to weather forecasting and emergency preparedness. Traditional warning systems depend on public trust and compliance. Trust that yesterday's failure of prediction seriously damaged. Climate scientists studying Atlantic storm patterns are identifying troubling trends that extend far beyond Portugal's borders. The atmospheric conditions that created Storm Kristin exist throughout the Atlantic coastline of Western Europe, from northern Spain through France, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Scandinavia. If sting jet phenomena are increasing in frequency, as preliminary data suggests, then yesterday's destruction could represent a preview of Europe's climatic future. The economic implications are staggering. Portugal's tourism industry, concentrated along the exact coastal regions most vulnerable to future sting jet strikes, generates over 15 billion euros annually. Insurance models for property and infrastructure assume predictable storm patterns that no longer apply. Agricultural systems depend on seasonal weather predictability that climate scientists can no longer guarantee. International disaster response protocols assume that neighboring countries can provide mutual assistance during emergencies. But if sting jet phenomena spread across Atlantic Europe simultaneously, traditional aid mechanisms could collapse entirely. The European Civil Protection Mechanism, designed to coordinate disaster response across member states, has never confronted simultaneous unpredictable emergencies. Recovery efforts will continue for months in central Portugal. Power grids will be rebuilt, transportation networks will be cleared and repaired, emergency services will adapt their protocols. But the fundamental questions that Storm Kristin raised about Portugal's preparedness for an unpredictable climate future remain entirely unanswered. The storm has passed. The questions it raised have not. Stay informed, stay prepared, and keep watching the skies.